What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a somewhat new apologist channel that, well, at least I recently found. And they have produced this video that supposedly proves that God exists using math and science. This is very interesting to me because I'm always on the lookout for good arguments for God that would include some kind of mathematical basis or scientific basis. Because if those kinds of arguments were sound and did in fact prove that a God exists, they would be incredibly difficult to refute. And so John from the Road Trip to Truth channel is going to be stepping us through how math proves that God exists. If you want to fuck around and find out how that's not true at all, then please stay tuned.
Think about it this way. When you memorized your multiplication tables, you were actually demonstrating that God exists.
Okay. How exactly does the multiplication table prove that God exists? Right off the bat, it just sounds like an ad hoc thing that you're saying. You're just arbitrarily stating that God is proven by multiplication tables. What is your evidence that God is necessary for multiplication tables to exist?
Without God, math would never have meaning.
Okay, again, citation fucking needed. Who says that God is necessary for math to have meaning? Math was created by humans. I mean, it represents real things in reality. It represents our experiences in reality. Like, for instance, the experience of having 2 stones and then you add another 2 stones to it, and therefore you have 4 stones. We developed math to represent the reality that we're presented with. So regardless of whether or not God exists, math is a representation of our reality. If, say, for instance, you have 2 stones and then you put another 2 stones and one magically disappears every single time, and then it equals 3 stones at the end of it, then that would just be math. Like, that would be the mathematical description of having 2 plus 2 equals 3. That would be our reality. And we have changed math, all throughout math's history to better represent the reality that we're presented with. So to say that God is necessary for math to make any kind of sense is really just refusing to acknowledge the fact that man created math to represent our reality.
And mathematical equations would never have a consistent result. There must be a constant in the universe for math to be consistent. No God, no math.
Well, okay. For one thing, because we created math to represent reality, we created math to remain consistent with reality. So, if it was the reality of the situation that adding 2 plus 2 rendered all these different values, then that would just be part of the mathematical description of addition. But that's not how things work, at least in our reality. So the mathematical description of 2 plus 2 is going to always equal 4. That's been our experience. If you can demonstrate how 2 plus 2 can equal some other number, then please do that and publish it in some kind of mathematical journal. I don't know. Sure, I think they have mathematical journal. You can publish a paper on it in some kind of journal out there of mathematics. But another thing that really confuses me is this whole idea that God gives this reality some kind of underlying uniformity. Like, God is the reason why 2 plus 2 always equals 4. Or 2 stones plus another 2 stones is always going to be just 4 stones. I don't understand the connection between God and that. And if you think about it, because this guy's arguing for the Christian version of God, any kind of Abrahamic definition of God is always going to pose a problem for this underlying uniformity that God supposedly provides. Because the Abrahamic God is very unpredictable. Well, he's predictable in that if you don't obey him and don't do everything to please him, then he will most definitely fuck you up in various ways. But as far as uniformity and reality goes, God doesn't give a fuck about that. At least the Abrahamic God. Because if you'll think back to the Old Testament, there was at one point in time God got really pissed off at this one group of Israelites and he created a sarlacc pit to swallow them whole. How is that uniform? Also, another thing, God regularly appears as some kind of burning column of fire or smoke. At one point in time, he presented himself as a burning bush to Moses. How in the fuck does this give you any kind of indication that God cares about the uniformity in nature? If anything, it seems like this God introduces variability into our reality, not uniformity. So when you say that God is responsible for the uniformity in nature or in math, I don't know what in the fuck you're talking about.
Same thing is true with science. If there's not a rock-steady hand that keeps the laws of nature in place, then laboratories would be worthless because a science experiment would never deliver the same result twice. No God, no science.
Again, this particular argument suffers from the same woes as the previous argument. For one thing, I don't see how the Abrahamic God can be seen as giving reality uniformity, or being responsible for the reliability of nature in the laboratory. Everything about the Abrahamic God says that he only ever introduces variability into reality, not uniformity. More to the point, you're not connecting this idea that God is responsible for the uniformity that we find in nature. You're not giving us any reason to believe that that's true. God seems, as far as I can tell, totally disconnected from nature, in that he doesn't give it its uniformity. He only ever introduces some semblance of variability. For instance, when Moses hit a rock with his rod, not that rod, it spewed forth water. Of course, God got pissed off at Moses at that point because Moses was just supposed to yell obscenities at it, but Moses decided to strike it with his rod to bring forth water. But still, how does this scream uniformity to you? Oh, here's another good thing. Jesus, supposedly the Son of God, also supposedly God himself, meaning that Jesus fucked his mother to have himself. He magically turns water into wine. How is that shit uniform in reality? I mean, nobody else can sit there and magically turn water into wine. Like, literally, magically, like transform it. Nobody else can do that. That is a single point in supposed history that is variable when it's concerned with the natural laws of reality. Oh, we could go all day with the stories from the Bible that do not showcase the uniformity of nature. How about the time that God inspired Joshua to march around a city for 7 days or whatever in the hell, and then yell at the walls, and the walls came down. That was Jericho, by the way, I believe. But still, you have Joshua marching around the city, then yelling at the wall and having his little trumpet things blasting at the wall, and then the wall crumbles. How is this scientific? How is this a demonstration of the uniformity in nature? What I feel like you're really getting at here is you're saying that God is responsible for creating the underlying rules of reality, that our laws, scientific theories, mathematics, laboratory experiments, that all of that is trying to describe. And so without God doing that, that means that math can't make sense, science can't exist, dogs fuck cats and have squirrels as babies. But the underlying issue that you have is that you failed to connect God to these underlying rules of reality. You failed to present a case that solidly connects those two things. I don't see a reason to insert God into that particular equation. It seems like an ad hoc, tacked on explanation as to why the rules of this reality even exist. All because you cannot fathom that the natural world is just that, the natural world, without any supernatural intervention whatsoever.
Finally, we see this with the topic of truth as well. If there isn't an absolute truth, like rape or murder always being wrong, then everything is just an opinion.
Yes, welcome to reality. Everything is just an opinion, especially when it comes to morals. You talk about absolute truth. That's not how I would describe absolute truth, being these subjective moral statements, right? I would say like absolute truth, like this overarching absolute truth that exists in reality. I think that could be described better as, that it's absolutely true whether or not an asteroid, went this way or that way. Or it's an absolute truth whether or not an asteroid struck our planet. I would say that those things would be absolute truths. And those absolute kinds of truths exist. But here's the asterisk. I don't think that we'll ever actually know the full absolute truth. Due to how we experience reality, even if we sat there and we saw somebody cause an ocean liner to disappear, or a burning bush, or anything else that seems fantastical to us now, I don't think that we can trust our senses to give us reliable information to determine that that is some kind of magical thing that happened. Or the absolute truth is, a bush was burning and was not actually burning, or a flood on this entire earth actually happened. I feel like science is geared towards revealing this absolute truth the best that it can. And we have to constantly tweak science and math in order to further reveal this absolute truth. But due to our human experience, we will never know what this absolute truth of reality is. Now, going back to your whole moral description of the absolute truth, morality is very subjective, and I've done plenty of arguments on this channel against the general argument from morality for God. But for your instance here, I would not say that either of those things are absolutely wrong, at least not the way that we perceive them, because the way that we perceive them typically tends to vary throughout time and whatever location on this planet, whatever civilization that you're in. Because what we would consider graping somebody now would not have been considered graping somebody back then. Or the grape itself wouldn't have been seen as wrong or bad. The same thing goes with murder. There are definitely times in the Bible where murder is seen as fine. Typically, Christians think that part of the Ten Commandments is to not kill, but that's not really it. It says don't murder, meaning don't murder your fellow Israelite or your fellow person in your society, because typically in good societies, or at least societies that tend to survive, murdering your fellow person shouldn't be allowed, because that's not a way for a society to thrive. So the things that you're talking about here, the graping and the murdering and all this stuff, those are societal norms that have developed over thousands of years. These are not absolute moral truths, because I don't think absolute moral truths exist.
A debate about right and wrong would be as trite as a debate over the best flavor of ice cream.
Well, I mean, I feel like debating these moral truths is just like debating whether or not vanilla ice cream is good or strawberry ice cream is good. They're not exactly that comparable, because obviously the moral truths have more of an impact on us as a society or us as individuals than like ice cream goes. So it's not a great analogy by any means. But as far as like a moral statement being an opinion, it is exactly like having the opinion that vanilla is better than strawberry. One group over here says that it's fine to marry somebody whether they're the same gender or same sex or anything like that. Another group thinks that you should burn in hell for all eternity just for going down on a motherfucker. You understand how this just seems like different opinions here. Even within Christianity, the moral foundation has changed over time. When Christianity first started out, slavery was seen as perfectly fine. It was even in the Old Testament indicated by God that it was okay to take slaves from foreign nations. Now, you couldn't enslave your fellow Israelite or your fellow Hebrew or your fellow Jew, but there were certain situations where your fellow Jew could become your slave, and you didn't even have to give that slave up after the appointed amount of time. Regardless of all of those nuances, it's still a fact that in the Old Testament, God looked favorably upon slavery, at least favorably enough that he did not command that it not exist or not happen, and he laid down rules in order for the Israelites to take slaves. So he at least looked favorably enough on slavery to indicate those things. But now, of course, we find slavery to be abhorrent. We cannot fathom thinking that somebody is good for indicating that slavery is fine. So why would you think that your God, who indicated that slavery was just fine, how could you think that that God was good and is the thing that gives reality its underlying uniformity? All indications that I've mentioned here seem to show that God is a shitty, genocidal dictator type of thing, and that it definitely does not give a shit about the uniformity in nature. All it cares about is introducing variability into our reality, and thereby making science unusable in this reality if that God were to exist. Because if that God does exist and he only seeks to introduce variability into our reality, then there's no way that we could do science, at least not reliably. At any point in time, God could decide to fuck around with the rules of reality, and our science experiments would not render the same results every time. So you're going to have to do a little bit better job in connecting God to this underlying truth of reality or underlying uniformity of reality. You're going to have to do a much better job of connecting those two ideas.
Because math is consistent, because experiments are repeatable, and because we know there's absolute truth, we know there is a God.
No, you don't, because God is completely separated from all of those things. Whether or not a God exists, morals would still exist. We would still have moral opinions on things if God were not to exist. The only thing that changes is that Christians wouldn't be able to think, oh, well, this book tells me how I should act, so therefore that's how everybody should act. That's the difference. You are confronted with the fact that you have to develop your own sense of morality. As for science and math goes, I don't see how God is connected to those either. He's definitely not connected to this underlying uniformity in nature, because as I've already pointed out this entire video, he only seeks to introduce variability into nature. Math is a description of the reality that we're presented with. Science is a description of the reality that we're presented with. If those realities were different in whatever way, then our math and our science would adapt in order to better represent our reality. All in all, I give this video a 1 beaker out of 5. And that's because it's somewhat well produced. Definitely great voice work by John here. I do appreciate him attempting to provide some kind of mathematical or scientific argument for God. But the entire video falls flat on its face because John fails to provide us with any kind of clear indication that God is necessary for the uniformity in nature. He just arbitrarily states that God is, in some kind of ad hoc fashion, just stating that God is necessary. John continues to introduce problems into his argument when he refuses to acknowledge that math and science and morals are all things that are dictated by a human mind, not by God. Math was created by humans to describe reality, science was made in much the same way, and morals are just something that have always existed, regardless of whether or not it's a human mind or some other animal mind. God is not necessary for any of them, and I just did not see any argument that connects God to the uniformity in nature or even to morality. Well, today's video was kind of short, heathens, but I do appreciate you guys stopping by and checking it out. If you will, please go down below and let me know what you think about this argument for God from math and science. Do you think that John succeeded in proving that we definitely know God exists? Or, like me, do you think it fell on its face? Let me know in the comments below. And hey, while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.